Thank you for being with us tonight. We are very, very excited. This is our kickoff of the Thinking Big digital series. We have an encore performance from Mike Walker. He spoke at John Carroll in the fall. He was so awesome. We invited him back for more. And he just published a book. And so that's out now and you can purchase that. And I'm sure we'll hear a little bit more about that. I'll put some information in the chat. But tonight we just have a wonderful experience to be with Mike. Next week, we are with two individuals from Walmart, the head of their sustainability initiatives. So what is happening around sustainability in a Fortune 1 company? That is going to be a fun, interesting, fascinating conversation as well. And so you have the PDF, you're here, you're in the room, so you know what we're up to. If you'd like to attend next week as well, or any of the other sessions that we have coming up, just go ahead and register on that PDF or register through LinkedIn, and we would love to have you. We would love to have you. So right now, I'm going to introduce our partner in this series, Chris Berry, who's the president of OhioX. My name is Scott Allen, and I am an associate professor at John Carroll University, associate professor of management. And you're actually joining us for a course that we have at John Carroll, and it's a course in technologies enabling disruption. So, Chris, I did that a little backwards because I forgot to tell anyone who I was, but now you can tell them who you are, sir.
Well, thank you, Scott, and it's a pleasure to be with you and Brent and Mike tonight, and everyone from John Carroll. And I know we also have people from probably across Ohio and maybe even beyond. I am Chris Berry. I'm the president of OhioX. We are a statewide technology and innovation partnership, a nonprofit with a mission of helping build Ohio into a leading tech hub. And so we're really excited to be partnering with Scott and John Carroll. This is a fantastic series. Scott, I know we've talked about one of the last in-person things that I was at was this event in person, which was so incredible and so cool. And I can't wait to do that. But what's really awesome about this is I'm in Columbus, you're in Cleveland, Mike is in Northeastern Ohio, and there's people from all over that are able to join. And I would echo that of Mike is an exceptional speaker. And I can't wait to hear what he is going to teach us, and I'll be joining every week. And this is a fantastic series. Kudos to Scott and the entire team. If you're interested in learning more about OhioX and what we do, we're just ohiox.org. Would absolutely welcome you to check us out, to consume some of the media we put out, and to join us for events like these that we are a part of all the time. But this is such an incredible event and series, and I'm very much looking forward to what Mike has to share with us and teach us tonight. And so I'm excited to pass it over to Brent, who I believe is a student of the class. And I don't know if you're here by force or by by freedom, but either way, I know we were talking before, and this is going to be a fantastic evening. So Brent, I'll kick it over to you, and very much looking forward, Mike, to what you are going to share with us tonight.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. Thank you. Well, yeah, welcome everyone. And it is my pleasure to introduce our guest tonight, Mike Walker. He brings experience and insight as an entrepreneur, futurist, speaker, big thinker, and author. With over 25 years of experience in emerging technologies, innovation management, and business strategy, Mike advises and partners with global executives to help maximize their business impact. He currently works at Microsoft as the leader of their cross-industry digital ecosystems innovation team. He previously worked with Gartner as a vice president of technology innovation research, in which his thought leadership is reflected in over 150 published research notes and over 5,000 client engagements. You can also find Mike hosting his innovation podcast, vNext, with articles on Forbes and interviews in numerous other publications such as Wired, CNN, Fox Business, and the Wall Street Journal. So without further ado, please give a warm virtual welcome to Mike Walker.
Hey, everybody. And just as a logistical thing, I will be sharing my screen through my video. So if you guys want to switch the view from the group panel view to the speaker view, that will help you see the content and all its rich detail. All right. So, and again, thanks everybody for having me on again. Really, really appreciate it. And so today, what I wanted to do was I wanted to share with you essentially what I do every single day, which is helping clients on their digital transformation journey. And one of the key areas of that digital transformation journey is around creating what we refer to as digital ecosystems, and it really being the catalyst for moving the industry forward. So we're going to go through that here today. And as Scott said earlier, when he kind of kicked this off, I'm going to do the shameless plug. The shameless plug here is I've got a book that's going to talk about all this in much more detail. So if you guys want to look that up, check it out, go for it. Yeah, and you can see, Scott, I included you here on the slide as well, my friend. So thank you again for the wonderful testimonial there. All right. So this next decade introduces something that I think is super, super important for us to understand, which is, yeah, we've got lots of great technology that is popping up all over the place. We've got new iPhones and watches and IoT devices and all sorts of great stuff. But that's just what's bubbling underneath the surface. What is really happening is we're seeing these net new business model designs really starting to upend traditional companies. And so, we had mentioned earlier companies like Walmart. Walmart is feeling the pressure from companies like Amazon, who is getting into their space, which, used to sell books, then they sold cloud services, and now they're in the grocery store business. And so what we're seeing is these digital giants are moving into this space and really changing the game. And when we talk with our clients, what we find is that 85% of those clients, those leaders over in the business area of these companies, are saying they must offer digital services or they will be irrelevant in the marketplace. And so that's a huge number. That's a lot of people. And I can tell you, based on those engagements, that there is a sense of anxiety. It's not fear. It's not necessarily optimism, but there is a big sense of anxiety on what to do and how to do it, moving into this new digital world. And one of these areas where there is this heightened anxiety is the data behind the essentially the vitality of these companies. We see that the average lifespan of an S&P 500 company has gone from 60 years down to 15 years. Again, this is kind of a staggering number to look at. And I don't want to be all doom and gloom either here on us either, because there is some positivity here, which is we do see a model that is being successful, and that's the digital model. And one unit of measure of many units of measure is what we see from the venture capital community. And VCs are an early indication of where the market's going because they're investing in futures. They're investing in the future companies that will dominate the world. And what we find, those criteria in which those VCs are looking for, we see an enormous amount of return. And it's not just over the past 2 years or 5 years or 10 years. But this is 20 years of net returns that we see these companies being so successful. Now, no Mike Walker presentation would be complete without some sort of 80s pop culture reference. And so I want you to just imagine you're hopping in a DeLorean and you're going to crank that bad boy up to 88. And we're going to go back to the year 2007. In 2007, the world looked very different. You can see there's a lot of companies that are grayed out. This is a picture of the top 10 companies on the planet based on market capitalization. And you can see some icons next to these names, a P and a D. P meaning a physical-based company, and D meaning a digital company. Now, yes, I'm kind of throwing some a shout out to my employer, the person that cuts the checks every week here. But actually, they weren't doing well at that time. You can see that they were down that particular year. But the macro point here is that this list, when you hop back in that DeLorean and you go to today, what do you see? All the companies are different. And every single one of those companies are digital first companies, meaning that their business models are predicated on digital products and services, not physical. Some of these are striving for an assetless model in their business. And so what this shows, and what I want to articulate just right off the bat with all of you, is the data speaks for itself. This isn't opinion or pontification, going into a corner somewhere and thinking great thoughts. But we see this momentum. It's obvious and it's already here. This is not a future thing. And so with digital, it's not about the next great killer app. It's about the next big killer market. If you take as an example, a company like Airbnb, Airbnb is valuated higher than a traditional hospitality company like a Hilton or a Marriott. So if they were going to compete head to head in a new market, what you'll find is that Airbnb will be much, much more successful because they don't have the asset baggage, i.e. they don't have to build a hotel to move into new markets. They're very agile and very nimble. And you can see from some of these examples here on the screen as well, you see a similar type of model. You see subscription services, you see data economy services, you see lots of different digitally based business models. And so this is super, super compelling. Now, there's lots of trends happening right now in the marketplace. If we had a good 3, 4, 5 hours to sit down together, we could go through all these trends. And I would love to do that. But today, to give some level of detail here to what we want to talk about, we're going to go deeper on one of those key emerging technology trends, which is digital ecosystems. But I will give a small shout out to some of the other notable mentions here for our 2021 list. First and foremost, we've got the ethical digital business trend, and that is really coming back around to all the cybersecurity work that's happening right now, the regulatory compliance aspects that are being forced onto companies, but also the impacts of social media and the impacts of the predictive AI that has been wrapped around those models and has influenced our society in very much unintended types of ways. And so what we're finding not only from a consumer demand perspective, but also from a regulatory perspective. And corporations are essentially saying, hey, we've got to be much, much more ethical. We got to step it up. And so you see companies like Apple, you see companies like Microsoft that have gone on record to say, hey, we're going to build out ethical AI programs here so that we can protect citizens, because these AI models, as some of you may know, it's not the algorithm that's bad. It's maybe the poorly curated data. Maybe it's the training that wasn't very well thought through when they built the algorithms. Not all of this is intentional or malicious. Sometimes it just is an unfortunate result of where we're at and the human beings that are programming these things. The third one is around the sustainable circular economy. And if you're not familiar with circular economy, it's a really, really important concept. Walmart may bring it up when they talk on the next call that you guys have. But it's essentially the notion that just like with our natural ecosystem in nature, everything gets recycled naturally. And it's about coming back to those types of principles with our products and services, being more sustainable, looking at our carbon footprint, et cetera. And so we see an enormous amount of effort happening right now with companies, either one, being forced, or two, realizing that it's actually in their best interest from a monetary perspective, from a cost optimization perspective, to be much, much more sustainable. The fourth is around transparently immersive experiences. This is the notion that everything around us is going to be processing information. Everything's going to be communicating with each other. Everything could potentially be a screen. And so we're seeing that evidence today with wearable technology, IoT technology, et cetera, where more and more technology is being embedded in our daily lives. And sometimes we don't even know it. And so if we were at an event right now, I would pull kind of, another kind of experiment with the audience. And I would ask all of you to raise your hand if any of you have used artificial intelligence today. And typically at one of these events, I'll get maybe 70 or 80 people raise their hand. And the rest of the 200 or 300 people, don't have their hands raised. And then I'll ask the question, how many of you checked your Facebook feed today? How many of you looked up the weather or did a Google search? And everybody raises their hand. And so what that little experiment is saying is that these technologies are oftentimes invisible to what we realize is actually being used underneath the covers. And so many of these technologies will continue to build on that momentum. And so just knowing that that's the case and knowing that, hey, I'll give you my little prop here. Your phone, it's got an augmented reality chipset on it already. It's got biometrics on it. You don't have to supply that technology. It's already there in the wild. And then lastly, intelligence everywhere. And, this is the notion that artificial intelligence is most likely in most places, but that's only going to continue to be much more pervasive. Now, I wanted to give you guys an overview of all of our top 5 emerging technology trends. And again, these are technology trends. These are not the social or behavioral trends that we observe and analyze, et cetera, but these are the technology trends. And I wanted to go over these because they're all interrelated. They all build on each other. You can't have a circular economy type of solution without building a digital ecosystem that supports it. Most of these other trends, they should be ethical in nature. And so you can see how they interact and they build on each other. So since we are talking about digital ecosystems and the next wave of business, it would be important to talk about, well, what the heck is a digital ecosystem? Let's start there. So digital ecosystems is really about taking many of those trends that I had talked about before, about everything communicating, storing data, processing data. It's about the ubiquitous communication technology with 5G, next generation Wi-Fi, et cetera, where we've got more data than we've ever had in the history of humanity. And it just keeps on building and building and building. And so what opportunity that provides to us is it allows us to connect things together in ways that we hadn't been able to do before. We're able to get something called context. We're able to understand based on the device or the person we're connecting to, we're understanding the environmental aspects around them. Why are they doing this? It's answering the why question, not just the what question. And so we're tapping into those endless connections. We're enabling an architecture that allows us to be dynamic in nature. Instead of a sequential or linear based system or a compartmentalized system, we're now able to have solutions that can interact with each other. And I'm going to give you guys some really good examples. And we touched on a few of those examples earlier with our example of like Amazon as an example. They've really pioneered this type of concept. Now, these technologies are meant to be self-organizing in nature. And so the term that I often go back to time and time again is orchestration. It's all about organizations being able to orchestrate their data in meaningful ways, in new ways that they weren't able to before. And ultimately, it's about creating a value exchange network where now we can provide new sources of revenue, but also expose multi-dimensionality to our customer base. So it breaks down the concept of a buyer and seller. Now, a buyer could also be a seller. That buyer could also be a data aggregator and sell their data. There's lots of different types of relationships that you could have with that customer now. This is all built on many different technologies. This isn't a product or service that you can buy from somebody. This is leveraging, core technologies like blockchain, like AI. And oftentimes that's a requirement. And I often talk about the trifecta of technologies that enable digital ecosystems such as blockchain, AI, and IoT. But also there are digital twin technologies, confidential compute technologies, predictive analytics, et cetera. Many technologies enable this paradigm. Now, You may have heard digital ecosystem about digital ecosystems, but not the actual word digital ecosystem. There are different approaches or aliases oftentimes used to describe digital ecosystems. Sometimes the term a platform business model is used. You know, a digital ecosystem can be a platform, but it doesn't have to be a platform. And so a platform business model is just one type of implementation of a digital ecosystem. Likewise, with Industry 4.0, that actually is a pretty close one-to-one relationship, but that's more focused on the manufacturing supply chain world. Or you may have heard of the Internet of Everything. And then sometimes people just generically say, well, that's just cloud. And obviously, we're talking about something that is much, much more than just cloud. Now, if you believe my former employer, the analyst community, Gartner, what they are saying in their research is that by 2025, so just over the next 4 years, digital ecosystems will represent 60 trillion in global revenue. And so that's a type of number where you lift your pinky up and you put it to your mouth and you say $60 trillion. Again, it's okay to laugh at my cheesy jokes. You know, my wife does it all the time. Anywho, moving on. There are 6 major drivers to this digital ecosystem paradigm. One is that catalyst that I talked about earlier. It's the digital giants are creating this environment. And, you know, when we talk to our customers, you know, over half of them say that ecosystems specifically from their competitors are the greatest threat to their business. So just think about that for a second. And that's just of the people that recognizes that's a challenge. You know, this is a game-changing paradigm. And here is an example, a double click on the Amazon example. What you see here is you see lots of bubbles, right? The bubbles represent the different types of ecosystems that Amazon has created. And what you'll notice here is it's not just one ecosystem, it's an ecosystem of ecosystems model. And so all of these different ecosystems build on each other. They interrelate. They have different business models. They have an idea of what value means from one ecosystem to another, and they compartmentalize those. And so, you know, you look at some of those stats on the left-hand side, and, you know, there is a reason why they invested in virtual assistant technology with a Echo device. It's to have that reach. That there's a reason why they've got a loss leader model with their Amazon Prime service. Again, it's to get the market and to get the reach. Now, Amazon, I don't want to pick on Amazon. They're not the only ones. There's many others. There's the Twitters of the world, the Facebooks of the world, the Alibabas of the world, the Tencents of the world, that are all doing very similar things here with ecosystems, Microsoft included. But also, so you see organizations are feeling it from the top down, but also they're feeling it from the bottom up as well, because the barrier to innovation has significantly decreased. Meaning my access to build something compelling, that those barriers have largely been broken down. This is a great example. Take one industry, and really this is more of a sub-industry. Take the logistics market. Just in the logistics world, there is around 3,200 startups in the logistics world, which you rewind 10 years ago, there were virtually none. There is over 17 billion in VC funding being pumped into these startups. And so if you are someone like a FedEx or a UPS or a Maersk, you're feeling this pressure right now, because you're not only seeing folks like Alibaba, who has gone on record to say, we are going to build a global logistics network that is going to be the one ring to rule them all. And then you've got this threat of very agile, very nimble startups that can out innovate you because they don't have the same baggage. They don't have the same legacy systems bringing them down, but they can afford to try new things very, very quickly in a much more agile way. So that's one. The second driver is the new business model designs that I've been referring to. And, when we look at these business model designs, there are several of them. We don't have time to go through all these in detail. I'd be more than happy to talk to you guys at some later point about these in detail. But at a high level, there are about 6 primary models here, from one on the far bottom left-hand corner around just monetizing data, creating models around your data, creating synthetic data to essentially monetize that. And that goes from something as simplistic as the traditional ad revenue that we see with traditional streaming services like a Hulu, to something much more sophisticated like a Facebook that will create essentially a digital twin of you and create prediction models and sell the prediction models, not sell your data, but actually sell what is comprised of you and what your behaviors are. And most importantly, what your behaviors might be. And so that data is the gold mine there. So it crosses a spectrum of complexity there in the data brokering model. Loss leader model, we talked about that a little bit. Fun fact, McDonald's, they actually don't make money or a whole lot of money off of cheeseburgers. They actually make money off the real estate. That's where they make the money. And so not a whole lot of people know that, but that's a loss leader model. Same thing with Xbox. We lose money on the console, but we make money hand over fist with the games and the Xbox Live service. You've got exchange marketplaces. This is the somewhat new types of paradigms that we see with that are enabled by digital ecosystems, where you're able to create a platform in which people can buy and sell goods. And that has a multimodal type of engagement model where not only can I provide services for people to kind of match make together, but also I can create things like affiliate programs where now I can have referral systems, like we see with Amazon or we see with Etsy or eBay. So you see kind of the continuum there as well. Or if you're like a WeChat, you can build a payments network on these exchange networks in conjunction. And so another key aspect here that is kind of a subtlety underneath the covers here is that typical industry models, those lines that we've traditionally built for those industries, those are either blurred or they're like Swiss cheese right now. And eventually those industry constructs will go away. As an example, there's not very many companies on the planet that are not banks. They offer payments, services in some way. Most companies on this planet have a logistics network because they have to, because they're, mailing their goods. So we're seeing a lot of these traditional paradigms start to break down in this new digital world. But also you see the on-demand model with, companies like Uber and Lyft and Airbnb and Fiverr, et cetera. Subscription models are straightforward and the freemium models are straightforward. But these are new business models that hadn't existed before, or at least they existed, but they were somewhat nascent. And so now these are exploding and they're changing how we value a company. And so if you were a bank 10 years ago, if you weren't profitable in the first year, they would shut you down. If you're Facebook now and you're not profitable for 7 years, they're going to keep pumping money into you because they see what the new value system is. Another aspect to these digital ecosystems that you're seeing in these other aspects is that businesses are being composable, meaning that I can, in a very dynamic way, start to offer products and services algorithmically. And so if you talk to the folks at Facebook, which I've got a few buddies of mine that work over at Facebook that do the news feed and all that. And what they'll tell you is they can't look at the trillions of transactions that are happening on their platform. The algorithms are acting on their behalf. They are presenting products and services, referrals, ads, connection points on the company's behalf and on the consumer's behalf, which introduces other problems from a societal perspective, but also it opens up an enormous amount of opportunity for other companies to leverage similar types of models. So, I've talked with traditional companies like insurance companies, where they want to be able to dynamically adjust rates based on conditions. So if there is a natural disaster, they will adjust their rates in real time. If your IoT sensor on your car says that you're a really good driver, it's going to automatically adjust your rates and put you in a right, product portfolio within their overall portfolio products, or use AI-based underwriters to be able to support if there was an accident or a claim or what have you. And so what we're finding is, now that we have the ability to reach into this data that we didn't have before and infer and build these relationships and build these models around our products and our customers, we can now orchestrate our business in new and interesting ways. The third driver here is the network effect. And, this is really, where you start to establish a platform and then the users grow and you are able to move into other areas. And, a great kind of analogy to this that I like to use quite a bit is looking back at one measure of success, which is user adoption. If you looked at previously, like for example, airlines, it took airlines 70 years to get to 50 million users. The PC, it took 14 years. YouTube, it took 4 years. Pokemon Go, Twitter, 2 years, 19 days. So you can see that as we become more and more digital, our reach is much, much more significant. So it gives us that opportunity to tap into a user base that, frankly, we weren't able to tap into before. And that's extremely powerful. And if we look at things like our traditional supply chain, and this can't be emphasized more than what we see today with like vaccines. With COVID-19, the biggest issue, surprisingly, isn't the number of vaccines. The issue is getting those vaccines to people. It's to have all the supporting infrastructure around it, et cetera. And so when we look at the supply chain, we see that it is very, very brittle. It is very linear in nature, which essentially data is trapped in each one of those little bubbles. And when that data is trapped in each one of those bubbles, that means I can't see it. I can't gain insights from it. So I don't have this kind of control tower view of what's going on through the back end of my business. All I see is a black box, or I'm trusting the data that I'm receiving. And oftentimes, what we find is we see millions of dollars and a lot of time leveraged to reconcile data. And oftentimes, we still don't have an accurate view of what's happening in our supply chains. Great example of this is pharma. If you look at pharma in the supply chain, the bad guys, it's a $200 billion industry. Again, another pinky raising to your mouth moment. $200 billion in counterfeit drugs every single year. And that's as a direct result of our supply chains being so compartmentalized. It's because it's like the telephone game with data. It's one party talking to the next, and then they're picking up the phone and calling the next guy or gal. And through that process, things get lost in transmission. Now, as you move over to the right-hand side of this picture, that is not a petri dish. I know I've been using pharma examples here. That is an illustration of an ecosystem where everyone's sharing the same virtual database. We're all using the same information, which means now I can see what's happening downstream. I don't have to stay with just in last mile. I can go all the way back to first mile and look at what happened when they pulled the ore out of the ground to build a product. I can do things like have a Carfax report of an airplane, as an example, which we don't have today. And we'll go through that example here in a little bit. But what we're able to do here is we're able to understand much more holistically what is happening within our business and orchestrate transactions. And it doesn't have to be something where I have to create bespoke custom integrations. It's all integrated into one platform. So a lot of power behind that. The fourth driver is really about reducing risk. And it's really getting to that risk adjusted value of having all this great value, but also balancing the risk component of it as well. And when we double click on that supply chain model, I had mentioned, the processes are disconnected. You've got different roles reacting in different ways. You have poor visibility into things like inventory. And you have a significant amount of fraud that is prevalent within that particular model. And so having a control tower that you're able to monitor these processes, to be able to create things like digital attestations, where I can digitally certify that it was this person that approved this transaction, that I can establish provenance of my assets, and I can go back to its birth and understand its entire life cycle. Extremely valuable. And the example that I've used, and this is an Ohio-based company, GE Aviation. We actually did this with them, where we were actually able to create this back-to-birth record for aviation parts, and look across their complex ecosystem, highly regulated, 21,000 independent data points across their entire supply chain, from when they pull the ore out of the ground, build an airline engine, to when it's sold to Boeing or Airbus, to when Delta's flying it back and forth, to when it's bought and sold on the secondary market, etc. Being able to see into that hasn't been able to be done before, outside of, believe it or not, actually, when you buy a plane, there is pallets of paper. Yes, pallets of paper that comes wheeling down the road for you to buy that airline. Essentially, it's all the transactional history, etc. Imagine if you were trying to figure out a detail on, row 17, seat 5. How hard it would be to pull the history on what the maintenance was on that particular aspect of the airplane. So, being able to have this all digitally, all verifiable, and that's another key aspect, is verifiable and true. That's where digital ecosystems most certainly shines. Fifth is really creating a platform for innovation. And this is where, when we ask our clients, the majority of them are saying that they view ecosystems as a launch pad, as a platform for innovation, for them to innovate and create new products and services off of. And it's not just that initial ecosystem, but it's all the digital technologies that they can now layer on top of that. Because if you're looking at building a great predictive analytics engine, you need great data. If you don't have great data, you're only as smart as the data that you're giving it. So the challenge then becomes, well, without that ecosystem verifying all that data within that ecosystem, then you're not able to jump to that point. Likewise, if I wanted to create things like a digital twin of my business and simulate my business, create AR, VR models, I can't do that unless I have really, really great data. And that's where, again, ecosystems come in. Now, to simplify this, again, I like to use lots of examples and analogies here. And, I'll take us back to, when the majority of our vehicles, had infotainment systems. And, they were trying to build their own ecosystems. They were, to some extent. And, they thought to go digital meant you build an app. Just build an app and put it on the app store. Let's make sure it's running off of a cloud-based solution. That'll make it digital. The challenge is that that's not what customers value, right? They don't value that, yes, that you're, on a cloud system somewhere, or that you're leveraging, the IoT sensor in the vehicle, but they value connectiveness. So in these examples, you see in the auto world, that was done, in the home world, that was done, health world, et cetera. But then, these digital ecosystem-based models came along. And what you see is, you see companies like Apple and Google and Facebook and Microsoft and others, they've come in and they've said, look, the value, yes, the app is valuable, and having it on my phone and remotely starting my car, that's pretty cool. But really, the value is connecting to my digital life. That's the value. And so once that jump once that leap was made, then it was like, oh, okay, now if we're not building these types of systems, we're going to have to conform to these existing ecosystems. Now, the story continues, and the story continues with the ecosystem of ecosystems. And so, again, to build on that value proposition, again, this is a platform for your business. This isn't a once and done solution or a segment of your business, but this is, a platform to launch many other services. So each one of these digital ecosystems has a macro ecosystem that it connects to pull in other aspects of their business. So if Apple wants to go into auto, they can. If they want to go into books, if they want to go into music, what have you, they're able to do that. And these companies are so powerful that you look at like an Apple, they've got more credit card data than any bank on this planet. So just think about that. A company that's selling computers and phones and services, has all this data on our payments. And essentially, it's not only your payments, but they need your address, they need your name. They've got all sorts of extended information on you. And so the point here by illustrating this is it's not enough anymore to create and innovate an app or a solution. You have to think bigger than that. You have to think about how this integrates with the daily lives of your users. And it's about the experience with the technology, not the technology itself. And again, that's what the digital ecosystems are there to enable, is essentially the connective tissue, the context of who I am, what I want to do, and most importantly, why do I want to do it? Lastly, the sixth driver here is equal opportunity innovation. And that's really, again, breaking down the barriers of innovation. If you believe in the stat from McKinsey, what they say is that, digital ecosystems is going to replace our notion of industries. And so there was a HBR, a Harvard Business Review article just recently on this, where they said industries are dead. It's now about domains. And so essentially, the term, the Mikeism that I use is Franken Industries. It's the mashup of all these different industries that create a monster of something that I want to go and monetize. And that's exactly what's happening right now, is we're seeing all these different industries being orchestrated, and that's lowering the barrier to entry for a startup, for an existing, large company to go into a new industry that they had never been in before. And again, we see these examples over and over and over again with the digital natives and the digital giants. Now, I want to pivot the conversation just slightly. I want to talk about, I've been talking about, what a digital ecosystem is, why you should care about a digital ecosystem, but I want to shift the conversation over to how you should think about this. When you start to look at your business and you're reflecting what it means to your business, is there a framework in which you can use as a mental model to represent what that would look like for your business? And the answer is yes, there is. I talk about this in length in the book that I just released, where I talk about the digital ecosystem framework. And you see a distinct business framework and a distinct technical framework. There is an important reason why these two are separated here. Over 80% of the conversation is a business conversation when we're talking about digital ecosystems, because what we're talking about is rewiring your business relationships. That requires lawyers. That requires business decision makers that write the checks and they go to jail when bad things happen. Those are the type of people that we need in the room to be able to make these decisions. This is not a technology conversation. So understanding, if we're going to create an ecosystem, who will be the participants? How wide of a net do we establish here? Do we have a closed ecosystem, like, let's say, Apple? So Apple, their competitive advantage isn't necessarily the iPhone. It's their supply chain. Their competitive advantage is they can create chipsets. They can get products to market in a extremely fast, risk adverse, and secured way versus their competition that requires a huge Herculean type of effort to pull together all these distributors within open ecosystems. Apple said, look, we want to be able to control this end to end and be able to maximize our margins to the highest extent. So they have a closed ecosystem. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just their approach. Likewise, with the capabilities you offer, what are the offerings, the services that you will offer within your ecosystem? How will you monetize this? How will the participants be incented to participate within your ecosystem? What sort of governance will we have surrounding this? So, what does it look like to onboard someone into this ecosystem or to kick them out for doing bad things? What is the definition of a bad thing? Right. And so, what we find is that there is distinct business models. There's 4 distinct business models when creating a digital ecosystem that will dictate all your technology decisions going forward. And so, what you see with the technical framework, and we're going to get into more of that here in a moment, but with the technical framework, you can see it's not just a bunch of APIs. It's not just a mesh style architecture, but you also have to have here user experience services. You have to be able to coexist with existing ERP systems and maybe even, God forbid, a legacy mainframe system. You have to be able to coexist, and maybe you even have a bimodal strategy where the same system and 2 different technologies is operating at the same time. And so you'll get a copy of all these slides that will go through these aspects in detail. But I've gone through this at a high level here with the business framework. The ones that I didn't touch on here was the governing organization. I'm going to hold off on that until I talk about the business model aspect because it's really going to light that one up. The ecosystem operations. What we find is not every company that builds that ecosystem will actually operate their ecosystem. So there's a set of decisions that you're going to have to make there as well. And so, I talked about these business models. The macro point here is when you looked at those Amazon bubbles on that chart, you'll find that each one of those bubbles had a different business model associated with it. Essentially, what we're saying here with these business models is that depending on how much control you want to give up, how much risk you want to avoid, what is the competitive advantage and time to market aspects, you can start to throttle kind of how you want to build these. So if you're a founder-led type of ecosystem like an Apple would do with a app store, essentially they define the walled garden. If you go to an Android model, you're looking at more of a partnership-led model. They've got a known set of actors that they partner with to essentially establish a set of rules, and there is governance across those particular players. We see this in traditional industries like airlines. You see, the One World Alliance, the SkyTeam Alliance, etc. You see more of a cooperative-led model where maybe you build essentially a nonprofit or a for-profit. Examples of this could be things like the Risk Stream Alliance. Folks at an Ohio-based insurance company, Nationwide Insurance, they're on the board of that, where they've gotten all their frenemies, their competitors, to all share their claims data so they can all leverage that claims data for mutual benefit. And so that's an example. Or I want to launch a global trade finance solution where I need participation from my competitors and peers and distributors, et cetera. And then there's autonomy led, and that is most certainly the edge case. And that's where you have self-governing AI-based systems. We've seen those in the market before, more kind of in the blockchain world with DAOs. Those have been fraught with issues and legal challenges. Because essentially you're forfeiting your human rights, not human rights, your human authority in which you program into the algorithms that govern the ecosystem. That will probably be more appropriate for edge use cases and in the mid future, 5 to 10 years, but for now, probably not as much. And so to get to that point, this does require a lot of forethought. This requires a lot of what I refer to whenever anybody asks me what I do for a living. I don't say that I'm a technologist. I say that I'm a family counselor. Because a lot of what I'm doing is I'm bringing executives together to help them soul search on what they want their company to be when it grows up. That's a lot of what we're doing here. Is we're looking at new ideas, how to express our business in new ways, and that requires ideation. It requires open innovation methods. It requires us to understand how how risky do we want to be with our digital ambitions? What are the specific principles, and how do we define value? So it really requires a lot of that analysis up front to really maximize the value of these digital ecosystems. And there's obviously, as you can see at the bottom, this is a bit of an eye chart. You can see here that there are a lot of considerations as you start to come out and define that business model. There are things like formation and legal structures, and we have to figure out things like our information architecture and our taxonomy and ontology, risk models, all that great stuff. The technical framework, again, there's a lot to this, and you'll get a copy of this, but at a high level, you've got essentially this is predicated on a cloud platform. Now, keep in mind, a cloud platform doesn't mean it's AWS or Azure or what have you. It's cloud computing architectural style. So this could still be in a data center of your own, while it's not quite as efficient, or under your desk or what have you. It's about using those cloud architecture principles. So it doesn't have to be, but it's ideal, obviously, if you do. Thinking about user experience services. So, earlier in the conversation, when we talked about the drivers, we talked about that it has to be a compelling experience for your customers. If it's not lucrative, if it's not something that that's going to be connected with my digital life, I'm not going to use it. That's the new standard. It's the good enough standard. It's buggy as hell, but it's got, it really helps me out in my day to day. It changes the paradigm significantly. When we talk about business services, that's about us understanding and really, understand how it integrates with the broader ecosystem of my business, how it coexists, how it integrate with my CRM systems, my ERP systems, etc. Edge is super, super important. We talk about IoT quite a bit. IoT is the reach into the physical world. It's helping us understand. It's our eyes and ears and taste for the computer to understand the context in which we're interacting with human beings. Extensibility, having a mesh style architecture that gives me the flexibility to be able to integrate in many different ways. Having a metadata integration architecture, again, is super, super important here to maximize the integration services. And at the heart of all this, at the middle, you see in the middle green portion here, the intelligence services. That's the data piece. That's the AI piece. All this is predicated on having AI-based technologies being able to maximize those connections, to be able to gain insights, not in a deterministic way, but also in a probabilistic way as well. And when all this comes together, it's building on that technical framework. It's lighting up that business framework to have something that's customized specifically for you. Some customers that are on the more sophisticated end will create something that is like a Amazon or Apple or Microsoft like experience where there is a marketplace. We did that with GE, with the GE example where, companies that participated in that ecosystem could build their own apps. The apps didn't have to come from GE. While they offered first-party solutions, they exposed all the APIs so the customers could white label the solution. So they could have a competitor of that company come on and their customers wouldn't know that it was a GE solution. It was their solution. And so it gives you a lot of flexibility there. And all of this is predicated on us having a reliable, predictable, repeatable approach to solving these problems. And so that's why, in conjunction with the frameworks, it's one thing to define the what, but we also have to understand how do we get there. And the digital ecosystem method allows us to do that. It allows us to understand what are the steps to get to those outcomes. When I talked about the open innovation approaches, well, what do we need to do there? Being able to understand that we do need to do a level of trend spotting to understand the marketplace, to understand the possibilities. We should look at industries outside of our own industry to gain inspiration into what we should be building. We should challenge the norms. We should ideate with our business partners, and we should challenge the status quo. Interestingly enough, whenever I run these ideation workshops, there's a activity that I use called brainwriting. And what you do is you have an index card. And so if this is an index card here, you usually on the top line, you have kind of a big, thicker line, and then you have more detailed lines below. The first wave of that activity, believe it or not, I'll actually say to the audience, to the workshop attendees, tell me all your bad ideas. I want to hear the worst idea that you have. I want to hear a crazy idea. I want to hear an audacious idea. Put that on the top line. And then what you're going to do is you're going to take that index card and you're going to pass it to your partner around the table. And what they're going to do is they're going to write on the next line how to make that idea more realistic, how to make it more viable. And we go round and round. And once we're done with that activity, until we fill out those cards, I ask the attendees, put those away for a moment. Now, let's do the same activity, but let's put your good ideas on there. And we do the same thing. And when most people think about this on the surface, they go, oh, well, obviously, you're going to get a lot of value out of that second activity that you went through. Well, not necessarily. What we find is when we actively go with the safe answer, that's exactly what you get out of that. You get monotony. You get conservative ideas. You get ideas that are already well vetted, that are not risky, that are not pushing the envelope. But when we do the crazy and audacious ideas and we work to make those better and more realistic, we actually find the gems of something really, really groundbreaking. And every single time that I've done this with clients, we've gotten at least 3 or 4 really, really huge business model ideas that we were able to take forward and make more realistic. So the moral of that activity is to challenge that status quo. It's to ideate in an open innovation-based way, and then move to the second stage where I strategize. The mistake that people make is they move straight to, let's understand our strategy and let's go and take a technology and map it to that. That's the absolute wrong approach. We want to make sure that we vetted out all those groundbreaking ideas. Essentially, as Donald Rumsfeld had made famous, he didn't invent this term, but we want to understand the things that we don't know. So we want to understand our unknown unknowns, which means we don't know about a technique, technology, or disruption, and we don't know how to deal with it. The goal here is to understand what's in the marketplace and understand how we would apply it to our business. So that's what we want to do. We want to get to our known knowns. And so second stage is really about taking those ideas and mapping it to our strategy, creating a business model around this, creating a monetization model around this, and designing our ecosystem. And lastly, when we actually do start to actually allude and talk about architecture, this is where we talk about architecting and governance and ecosystem design, where we get into that technical framework and light it up. Now, you might notice at the bottom, you see this term called MVE. And essentially, this is, a pithy way of saying minimum viable product, but saying minimum viable ecosystem. And so with minimum viable ecosystem, what we're saying here is that even at the very beginning of the process, we want to be building something. We want to test things out. It could be coded. It could be storyboards, what if scenarios. It could be lots of different things. But we constantly want to be building and testing our ideas, failing fast, and focusing on the things that do work for our business and get rid of the waste and the things that won't work for our business. And so if you wanted to leave this conversation with a eye chart that will hurt your head after the end of this conversation, this is it, folks. These things are complicated. folks like Amazon, folks, like Google and Microsoft and Apple make it look really easy. But there is a lot of thought that you have to put into this to build these ecosystems. There are almost endless options in which you can choose and pick, etc. And so I wanted to show you kind of the Uber eye chart here on when we start to blow out these frameworks. What are the sorts of things are we talking about? Just in the governing organization, understanding, well, is this ecosystem going to have a board of directors? And, now I got to think about bylaws. I got to think about membership. I got to think about working groups. I got to think about how I'm going to support this and maintain this and, fund this to keep it alive and running and recruit, my participants. How do I make sure that I don't have infighting within my ecosystem, that actors aren't stealing their competitors' data? How do we deal with intellectual property and making sure that there isn't shady things happening there? And so there's a lot to consider here. And that's why we went through the level of rigor on building a framework and also having a methodology to help us walk through what are the key questions that we need to understand to build these digital ecosystems. And you will find some of those answers in the book that I've referred to. The book, just as a high level plug, is essentially a primer for executives. The book was written as a easy read for business decision makers. Again, those people that write the checks and go to jail when bad things happen. This was meant to get straight to the point of what are these ecosystems and what do they need to do with their staff to get them ready to support them and walk them through the frameworks and methodology for that. So with that, that's what I got. Hopefully this was helpful for folks. I think we're going to do some Q&A now, but I'll turn it over to our master of ceremonies here.
Mike, my head always hurts a little bit after listening to you speak, and I love it. I absolutely love it. Thank you so much. We have questions, and so if you all have questions, please feel free to place them in the chat. But we've had a few kind of sprinkle in here along the way, and so I'm going to ask you a few of them, and then I'm going to kind of work my way through. This one was interesting. It's interesting to see how nonprofits leverage digital ecosystems and how they're integrated. Can you think of nonprofit examples of a lot of this that you've just spoken of?
Yeah, and actually, the whole consortium model, there's actually a lot that's happening in that particular space. And so governments are investing in these approaches. You can think of the open source community as another community that has embraced this in a big way. And so when I talk about the business model aspect, it doesn't have to be a for-profit company. It can be a nonprofit company. And so, actually, when you look at that governing organization that you see here, that's the beauty of being able to have my iPad here and pinch and zoom. You can see here, this is a structure of essentially a nonprofit. And where you've got people that don't have financial interest in the services and products that are being sold through it. And so this is a more complex example. I'll tell you that business model is the hardest to get off the ground and get adoption. So oftentimes when they build digital ecosystems, if they can, they start more in a founder-led model instead of a cooperative-led model, which is what this is. But most certainly there are many examples of those ecosystems out there.
Great. Okay, here's another one. Question about the 60 trillion economy revenue by 2025 number. What percentage of that is some form of substitute goods, in quote, and what is new revenue over 2020-21 revenue?
So what is, to simplify that, would be where are the cases where this is a case of digitizing existing service versus net new products and services, is what I'm hearing.
Ryan Franks, if you want to speak up, do so now.
Or forever hold your peace.
Ryan Franks.
Yeah, that's correct. I'll unmute. Thanks.
No worries. So I don't have the actual numbers to be able to articulate those to you, but here's what I suspect. What I suspect is that uh, what we're going to see here over the next few years, it's going to be more of the first part of the equation, where you see digitization of existing approaches. That's going to shift, and we're actually starting to see kind of a sea change with new styles of products and services. So as an example, this is where you start to see with like the Tencent and the Alibabas and the Amazons of the world, where they're reinventing retail. They're reinventing the logistics world, where they're buying fleets of aircraft, they're buying fleets of trains and trucks, out there in the marketplace, and they're slowly converting that business model to this new business model. And so I think that you'll see kind of this big companies starting to cost optimize and move into the digital realm by essentially dipping their toes into the water, if you will, as an analogy. But they're going to have to shift over to this new model of monetization. We see this with the entertainment industry, where people aren't buying movies and music anymore. They are subscribing to this. And so the subscription model is a great example of this shift. The data economy is, again, another great example of where synthetic data is being created and that's being sold, not the monetization of the traditional ad data, where it was just, what does Mike Walker like and don't like, but rather, why does Mike Walker like it, and what is he likely to buy next, instead of something reactive. So I think that balance is going to start to shift here over the next few years.
Great, great. How did the digital transformation change the way banks view the valuation of these companies? So, for instance, maybe like a Drizzly with Uber, right? That's been in the news. And we actually, for those of you on the line right now, have a John Carroll alum who was closely involved with Drizzly for years. And so it's kind of a fun story that we'll talk about at some later date. But what do you think there, Mike?
So what I think there is, before, if we got back in our DeLorean and we went back, 15, 20 years, you didn't have the digital option. You weren't able to monetize data in a meaningful, scalable way. Now we can. And that's the difference is, when you see articles like data is the new oil, which that's problematic to say. But the point is the currency now is the data and what I can do with that data versus a physical asset. That was the tipping point.
Great, great. What is your advice for undergraduate, graduate students that are entering a workforce where digital ecosystems are going to be prominent, yet they might not be technologists by trade?
My recommendation is that you understand these concepts and you understand how to apply them from a business perspective, that you're able to understand, how to innovate around these and, the possibilities of what is new. Understand that it's about not the solution, but the experience. And so, that's both a technology and business conversation. And frankly, I would assert here, and this may be controversial for folks, but there is no business conversation. There is no technology conversation. They're one conversation. There's not a business on this planet that can survive without technology. So the more and more we try to separate these things and create this firewall between them, I think the more problematic things become. And essentially, we're just creating artificial barriers. So, it is a business driven technology conversation, is how I like to refer to it as. But for those folks that are looking at the future workforce, it is embracing kind of the new digital reality rather than trying to force fit the old reality.
Okay, great. Speaking of kind of a work from home, new way of being, is remote work from home, an inevitable part of the digital ecosystem, which with such a large amount of companies moving this way during COVID, will overhead office space, even brick and mortar, have a place in the next decade?
It will. I think that if you look at the tipping point. So I'm a big fan of, let's not try to do the crystal ball activity and guess what we think the future is going to be. Let's look at the leading indicators. Let's look at the data and make an informed decision on what we think could be the possible scenarios. I think the likely scenarios with the workplace is, and we're seeing the data to support this, and we're seeing big, large executives like Microsoft, like Twitter, like Facebook say, you don't ever have to come back to the headquarters. So my company is based in Redmond, Washington. I'm not in Redmond, Washington. And, now most certainly, I probably will never be there. Microsoft's culture was very much a culture of you have to be physically there to be relevant. That has significantly changed. And I think what this has done, the pandemic has forced people to open up their minds to hybrid work. And I think that's what it will be. It'll be a hybrid work environment. And so if you are living in Seattle, maybe you will sell your house in the high rent district of Redmond, Washington, or Bellevue, or Kirkland, or downtown Seattle. And maybe you'll move to the outskirts. Maybe you'll move to Everett. And you'll have a hour-and-a-half commute, but you're only making that commute once a week.
Yeah.
And so what we're going to see is we're going to see people start to move out to the suburbs. We're going to see people move to other locations like Ohio, where the cost of living is much, much better than going to these, high rent areas in San Francisco and other areas. So I think the hybrid model is here to stay. I think corporate real estate is in danger. I think it will be more boutique. It'll be like the record store. We're still going to go to a record store and buy music. It's not going to be as often. And it's going to be an experience. And so if I'm going to go back to a brick and mortar office, it's going to be a compelling experience. It's going to be one in which I go there to have human interaction, to collaborate, to innovate, versus to go and fill out my expense report. There's no reason why I can't do that in my pajamas at 7:30 in the morning with a cup of coffee. There's no reason why that can't happen.
How would you put your time card in? I don't get it.
I know.
Okay. What does this mean for people that are entering the workforce in the next 5 to 10 years? Should all of this be taught in undergrad or maybe even high school?
So, yeah, I mean, my opinion is it should be taught as early as possible. People need to understand kind of the realities. I think we need to live kind of what the market's going to be. As a great example, the US hasn't been as great in adopting these approaches and emerging technologies, but you look at areas like the Netherlands, and they've got digital as a first class citizen in the classroom, K through through 12. They've got environments where they're pushing the envelope, where they're saying, look, we're going to have high schoolers be the mentors of third and fourth graders. And so we're going to break down the notion of a traditional classroom where all the walls are movable and removable, where now I can bring together and create custom spaces, environments, and I can bring digital technology in when it's appropriate, but also analog technology when it's appropriate as well, and take a walk in the woods, etc. So I think for the first part of the question, yes, it needs to be taught early. We need to focus on creating high value experiences and how to enable that. And also critical thinking is super important whenever we think about this as well. That is a skill set that I'm super passionate about teaching my children, that, even if you're not going to be a programmer, program something, because it's going to train your mind to think in a different way, and in a way in which you challenge the status quo. It forces you to think things step by step by step. For those going into the workforce or in an undergrad or what have you, absolutely. These are the business models of the future. I think the more we can infuse this into that conversation, the more prepared you're going to be for the future workforce.
Yep. Great. A few more. You up for it, Mike?
I'm up for it. Let's do it.
I saw you had a big coffee. Okay.
I was actually asked if this was Guinness because it was a little frothy. Like that was at 11:30 this morning. I was like, no, I do like Guinness, but not this early.
If you check out VNext, the podcast, you'll learn that he does like some whiskey, right?
Yep. Whiskey and bourbon.
Okay. So as more of our personal data is stored and used by algorithms, what will the future of personal digital privacy look like?
I think right now the pendulum is swinging back and forth a bit. I think we have been somewhat in the Wild West, where we've forfeited a lot of our rights, and we really didn't understand kind of what we were getting into. And so, saying, hey, we're going to have this Google service, it's free. Let's, this is great. Let's keep doing this. But nothing in life is free, as we know. that data is being used for both good and for purposes for shareholders of a company. And so I think what's going to happen going forward is it's not going to continue down this trajectory. I don't think that is sustainable at all. And we see the tipping points. We see laws and regulations being passed, especially in Europe, around this. GDPR was the start of it. It's only going to continue. But this notion of what is your data? What are your rights to your data? And if my data, let's just take something simple. Let's take health data. I've got a watch that's got health data. I've got my DNA testing through 23andMe. I've got an emergency room that I went to when I was in Phoenix, Arizona. I've got my doctor. I've got my medical data all over the place, internationally, nationally. I get around. My data gets around. Now, do I have an idea of where that's at? Could I revoke that? Could I restrict my employer, as an example, from being able to see that data? We're not there yet, but that's where it's going. I really, truly believe that, because I think as we become more informed consumers, not just technologists, but consumers, we're going to demand it, or our governments will demand it on our behalf.
Okay, two more kind of themes of questions. Government regulation and ecosystems.
Mm-hmm.
What are some thoughts in that space?
There's a lot. The challenge is we live in a global economy.
A whole nother hour PowerPoint.
It's a whole other hour, man. Where do I start? Let's start with taxes. No. But that is a very real reality, is when you go across states and countries, how you deal with your products and services change. That's no different in the digital world. And so if I'm doing business with folks in Germany, well, guess what? That data can't leave the borders of Germany, because they've got data sovereignty laws. There's different types of sovereignty laws in England. I've got other issues in China, and all sorts of different areas. So most certainly ecosystems. That's why it's more of a business conversation, and frankly, a legal conversation when we talk about ecosystems, because it's about those relationships with those other entities, with those governments, and with those organizations that are internationally based. And so one company that I can talk about, and we did a podcast episode on this as well, if you guys are interested, but it was with Siemens and Hinkle, where I helped them build what they call tax chain. And essentially it's a digital ecosystem for global trade finance. And how do you look at the taxation of goods as they go across geographical borders? How do you manage that? How do you audit that? Today, it's been extremely hard to do that. It's been, many, many man hours of people reconciling data and maybe getting it right, but most likely ending in an audit.
Yeah. There was a comment really early in the presentation, J&J and Berkshire as digital companies. Talk about that a little bit.
Of what I'm allowed to talk about.
Okay. Oh, okay.
So definitely from an ecosystem perspective in the pharma space, there are actually for J&J specifically, they are required by 2023 to be able to digitally track all pharmaceutical drugs across their supply chain. And so that is being forced upon them. I'm actually on the board of the Pharmaceutical Utility Network, which is about getting these pharma companies together and essentially creating that digital ecosystem to support being able to see that.
Yeah.
So there's most certainly a lot of aspects there for that. With the other one, I'm not sure if I can talk about it, so I won't talk about it.
Okay.
That's always the safe answer.
Fair enough. Okay. There's one last question for someone out there to say it. If yours has not been spoken, if I haven't asked it and you want to hear it, you want to hear the answer, you can unmute yourself and ask. Got about 5 seconds left.
Don't be shy.
Okay, here's what we're going to do. To conclude for the night, I want you to put one word into the chat, or one word reflection. What's the word that comes to mind for you as you think about our time with Mike this evening? So if you would, just put one word. Oh, they're coming in quick. Mind-blowing. That's a hyphenated word. Experience, whoa, experience, insightful, innovation, mind-blowing, informative, revolutionary, amazing, now, eye-opening, crazy, impressed, inspirational, complex, mind-blowing, innovation, innovative, revolutionary, eye-opening, complex, enabling, unbelievable, transformation, open-minded, excited, advanced, educational, knowledgeable, insightful, future, amazing, visionary, impressive. A lot of eye openings tonight. Impressive, motivational, cutting edge. And we will stop there. Mike Walker, we can't thank you enough for being with us this evening. Everyone give Mike a digital round of applause if you would. Go ahead and give him some claps and some props for giving his time and being with us tonight. Mike, thank you, sir. I will be in touch. Be well. You have a favorite quote you want to end us off with?
A fool with a tool is still a fool.
Okay. Be well, everybody. Take care. Have a good night. It's great. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you. As far as sharing decks and all that stuff, should I just email you?
Yeah, that's perfect. That's
Awesome.
perfect.
Hey,
All
Mike,
right.
that was brilliant.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate
I
it.
loved it. I actually work for Cerner and we do some stuff with you guys, and I love that whole digital strategy. I love the market view and stuff.